Okay. Welcome back for the next round of our career fair. Tuning in from Washington, D.C., we have with us Dr. Erika Shugart, the Executive Director for the American Society for Cell Biology. She transitioned to science communication soon after obtaining her PhD by interviewing scientists from various fields and building a blog on alternate careers. Mind you, this was during the time when the concept of alternate careers or blogs did not have much traction. From there on, it was an upward journey to the National Academy of Science, where she finally made director. She moved on to becoming an integral part in the conception of the Marion Coachland Science Museum. Currently, she heads the ASCB, focusing on molding it into an umbrella organization that provides a broad platform for engaging scientific collaborations. She also loves to travel with her family. Today, she'll be talking to us about a career in scientific communication and her journey in the same. We're very delighted to have you with us and are looking forward to hearing you talk. With this, I'll switch off my mic and camera and hand over the stage to you.
Wonderful. Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's just an absolute pleasure to be here with you virtually. And I'm really delighted to share a little bit about science communication careers and a little bit about how I got to where I am as well. So before we get started, I always like to know a little bit about my audience. Normally I do this by a show of hands, but today we're going to launch a quick poll. And if we could launch that poll, just to give a sense of how many people are interested in science communication as a career out there. So just take a second here to sort of, I don't want to take too much time, but is this really a career for you? Or is this something that's you plan to do more as a hobby? You plan to stay in research, but you're really interested in science communication as something that you'll do outside of work? Or maybe you have an entirely different plan. And if everybody could just quickly submit that, I'll give you just a minute, that would be great. That'll help me. And then the second question is, what areas are you most interested in? I'm going to be talking a little bit about a number of different areas you might want to consider going into, and would just be really interested if there's a particular one that you might be interested in. So just take a second there. All right, then I'd love to see the answers. So hopefully I'll be able to see that. And we'll get a little sense of who's in the audience. So I'm going to talk about what the qualities of different scientific careers are, and then a little bit, few tips about how you might get in. So if I can see the results. Close. And I'm not sure if I'm going to see the results. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. Right. All right. So just to give you a sense, we are talking about what back in the day was called alternative careers. So this is a diagram that was put together from the AACB, and it does reflect American numbers, but they are fairly applicable to other places as well. When you start out, most of you are getting PhDs or have PhDs, there's a large number of people that go in. And at each sort of stage, people make different career path choices. So some people may decide that they want to leave science before finishing their degree. Many people go in and do sort of a cycle of postdocs, which you see there in the middle. And then over on the far side, you'll see a number of different outlets that people might go into. And of course, a lot of people go into science and get a PhD because they think they're going to go into tenure track faculty positions. So that's in that sort of upper right quadrant there. And what you see is that that's about maybe fewer than actually 1 in 10 people that start their PhD. So it used to be we considered everything else an alternative career, but really today, as we see in that upper right corner, maybe the faculty position is that alternative career. So I'm going to be focused in careers that are in this sort of red circle. These are non-research, but still science-related jobs. There are a number of different kinds of things you can do in this quadrant, from law to policy to science communication, and I'm going to be focusing on the science communication and the policy. And you can see that almost as many people go into this area, large sort of area bucket of careers, as go into tenure track faculty. So it's very, very common nowadays for people to make that path. And so you're going to hear a little bit about my career path. I have a scientist dad. I grew up in this weird town. It was a national lab town in the US where almost everybody's parents were a scientist. So I literally thought everybody wanted to be a scientist when they grew up. It's a little bit not normal. And so I went on to grad school. I really loved science. Realized about midway through it wasn't the path for me. Did go thinking I was going to do science policy, but wound up in a science communication career. So I went into the Office on Public Understanding of Science at the US National Academy of Sciences, where I rose up to director. Then, as you heard, I did a stint in a museum for about a decade. Really loved that community. But I was really interested in doing sort of moving up in my career, and the museum kind of ran out of money. So I had to move over. I moved over into the Science Society area as the Director of Communication and Marketing Strategy at the American Society for Microbiology. But I was interested in an executive director or CEO level position, and that's where I am now since 2016. So I'll be talking a little bit from my perspective, not only in making the switch into this kind of career, but also as a hiring manager. I see a lot of resumes. I see a lot of people that are looking to break in to science communication careers. And so these are, if I'd given titles to all the jobs that I had, these are the kinds of titles I would have had. I've done everything from media relations to marketing to development to museum professional. So you can see that even though I had just a few titles along the way, that I've actually done a lot of different roles. And that's what I'd like to talk to today, is about some of these different paths. So when people tell me they want to go into a science communication career, it's a little bit like an American saying, oh, I'm going to Europe on holiday. It's like, well, that's great, but are you going to the countryside of Ireland, or are you going to Venice? Clearly, you can have very, very different experiences in this sort of broad breadth. So anytime when somebody says, oh, I want to go to science communication or science outreach, I'm like, well, really, what kind of job do you like? What are your passions? What do you like to do? And I like to think of jobs in that way, of having kind of different qualities. And I'm going to talk about those. And as I go through the different career paths, sort of reflect on that as a format. What I like to think of is qualities of a job. Is the job something, particularly when you first get in, and this is, I'm thinking more like when you enter in, lots of jobs change as you move up in management. But is it more individual? Are you working kind of on your own? Or is this something where every day you're going to be working as a team? So is it individual or is it collaborative? And then the next is it's sort of private or performance. So private would be something where you're kind of heads down, doing stuff at your desk most of the time, whereas performance might be more like teaching, where you're up in front of a crowd and it really requires you to be in front of people all of the time. Then you have different kinds of recognition. This is actually an area that I find to be a pretty big stumbling block for scientists when they make the transition into particularly lots of science communication careers. Lots of science is about individual recognition. You get assessed individually. It's your name on your paper, the number of talks you've given. Whereas a lot of other kind of careers, you're either anonymous, nobody really knows who you are outside of maybe your field, or it's collective. You're, again, doing a team effort. Now, these are broad brush. Clearly, some areas of science have collective recognition and other areas may have individual. It's not as if you don't kind of move up in your career, but it's kind of where you get the most kind of recognition. The next is whether most of the entry jobs are freelance or where you have to have an employer, whether it requires a PhD or not. And then, is it something where you're going to be a generalist, needing to know a little bit about a lot of things, which is definitely my career path, or more of a specialist, where you're going to be really doing a deep dive into certain areas. And so now I'm going to walk through some of the bigger, more typical science communication careers that are out there. Well, actually, first, I'm going to put this into that sort of framework into research, just to give you a sense of what is going on. So research is generally a collaborative endeavor. Most scientific papers have a lot of different names on them. It's really people that are working together to get something done. It is, for the most part, private. Although, yes, you're going to give talks sometimes, you're going to do some things that are performative. For the most part, you're working in your lab, pretty heads down. You're not in front of crowds of people all of the time. So in research, if you're going to the academic route, it's really about individual recognition. Is your name first on the paper? Did you give a poster? Did you give a talk? Whereas if you go into industry, it probably is going to be much more collective. Your team is going to create the drug or the product. Most research requires an employer. I don't think there's tons of freelance scientists, not to say that there aren't some, but generally speaking, you're going to be working with an employer. And most of them require a PhD. Yes, there are plenty of people that have very successful careers in science with a master's or not, but generally speaking, it's really about getting that doctorate. And research requires you to be a specialist. You really need to know a lot about a little thing. Even when scientists think they're generalists, they're still specialists. They're still really doing a pretty deep dive into things. All right, so now to the science communication careers. All right, the first is science writing, because I think This is a career that I see a lot of people approach me. They really are interested. When we post a science writing position, we get hundreds and hundreds of resumes. It's a very competitive area. Lots of people, the kind of titles that you might see here are, of course, writer at a newspaper or a blog or something like that. You might be a reporter. There are more technical writing that you might do and grants writing. So there's a lot of range of different kind of writing careers. And for the most part, these are heads down, in your office kinds of things. Most people start out as freelancers, but eventually might move to employer, although you can make a very successful career as a freelance. And for the most part, I know many science writers that do not have a PhD, although if you're in the more technical field, it doesn't require a PhD. And these are folks I do think science writers particularly actually benefit from not writing in their specialty if they're writing for a broad audience, because you do get expertise blindness. So sometimes it's really hard to know what other people don't know about your subject. And so it's kind of actually good when you're doing something that's in a different subject. All right, the next is media relations. So this is a variation on science writing. So media relations, a lot of people that go into science writing and think maybe they're going to be a journalist or something actually wind up in media relations. So this is a job where you're working for an employer. You might be freelance working for several employers, or you might be in your university or in a company, and you're communicating with reporters, helping to push out information that's coming from inside your institution. And generally speaking, it's pretty anonymous. Yes, you're going to get your name on the press release, but only really reporters know who you are. And the kinds of titles that you see here are public information officer or press officer. And what I would say is if you're interested in science writing, you should definitely go in your institution and talk to these folks that are in your institution, because they're going to help you. They might have some work for you. They might be able to tell you a little bit about what they do. Definitely a good entry. The next career is a very different switch. So science communication trainer. I would say this is a career that's actually fairly new, a career path that's actually much newer. And it again, usually you're working on your own. Sometimes you might work with a partner on this, and it's very performative. You're definitely going to be up in front of people. You're helping them learn to communicate. You're definitely going to be working with other people all the time. And there's a wide range of different kinds of recognition here. Most of it is anonymous and collective. Usually you're behind the scenes helping somebody else that's going to be the person in front of the scenes. So you're not going to be the one that's going to kind of get the public credit for what's going on. There are both freelance and employer-based science communication trainers. There are a lot of communication trainers in scientific societies and other places. Often it's a piece of another job. So they might do media relations and science communication training. Doesn't require a PhD, although a lot of people that do this for the sciences have them. And the kind of titles you look here is science communication trainer, clearly media trainer, and producer. So people might work for radio shows and they're helping people get their or TED Talks or things like that. And they're really helping people think about how to communicate their science. The next area, which is informal science educator, is a really broad umbrella term that encompasses a lot of careers. So the kinds of places that you might be an informal science educator is in after school programs. So helping kids, usually a lot of the focus is between kids that are about 5 years old or younger to about 13. So in the United States, that would be elementary and middle school. It's different depending on what country you're in, but kind of that younger preteen age group, and you're trying to get them enthusiastic and interested in science. You might get jobs in this area at science festivals and different kind of science events like science cafes, which could be more adult focused, and online. And because there's such a wide range, you get kind of everything. You can have things that are sort of more behind the scenes and then things that are more performative. A lot of these jobs do ultimately require an employer, not all of them, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. And a lot of people in these careers don't have PhDs, and they're definitely generalists. And so in this umbrella, there are a number of different areas that you might work. One is as an entrepreneur. And I am seeing this more and more. I went into this field and Hara sort of, said it was back when it was considered alternative, and not a lot of people did it. So I could go directly in and have an employer immediately. But what I'm really seeing today is a lot of people doing these kind of careers, informal science education careers, and even writing careers as an entrepreneur. So it's really that freelance. They're creating their own company. They're creating their own mode of doing it. And it's, I think, very exciting, but again, a little bit more tenuous. Lots of people have to kind of do it as a side gig with another job for a while. So an entrepreneur is really, doing the same kind of thing that you saw up there in formal science education and science communication training, but as an independent business. And a lot of people that do this do have PhDs. It's people making that transition, and they're really working to get that recognition. Ultimately, what I see in the careers is a lot of people start as an entrepreneur. Maybe they're doing science communication training on their own as their own side business, and they eventually get picked up by an employer as they kind of have established themselves. Another, under that informal science education umbrella, is museum professional. So museums, there are two kinds of science museums out there. There are natural history museums, and these are the kinds of museums that if you went to as a child would have the dinosaur fossils and things like that. And they have positions in them that are curators, which really are the same as research. You're doing research inside a museum setting. And then people that might work on exhibitions and things like that. And then there's science centers, which are really those phenomena-based museums. So if you've been in one of those, you might have played around with lights. It's a lot of hands-on things, lots of touch, and it's generally aimed at slightly younger kids. So if you're not a curator, and I consider curators to be in that research category, if you're not a curator in a museum, then you're going to have titles like exhibit designer, educator, and program manager. And those are the kind of jobs that you'll go in if you really want to have a science focus. So most of these are very collaborative. Almost all the work that's done in museums is exceedingly team-based, very private for the most part. You may have something performative. Maybe if you're doing the educator role, you are going to be out in front and giving tours and stuff like that. And it's not like you're not called upon to do that at some point in time, but a lot of it is behind the scenes, developing programs or developing exhibitions. There are a few independent museums out there that people have started, but for the most part, you are going to require an employer. Again, I've seen people be very successful with and without PhDs. I think people with PhDs, other than curators in museums, is a phenomenon that started probably about 15 years ago. So there is a cadre of people with doctorates, but for the most part, a lot of people in these roles do not have PhDs. And you have to be a generalist if you're in these kinds of exhibitor development or educator roles, because you're going to need, whatever the breadth of the museum is, you're going to need to be able to communicate about that. When I was in the museum, I did everything from global climate change to clean water to infectious disease to aging, pretty wide range. Again, mostly I worked in biology, but it was a lot of different things. I did psychology as well. So I always felt like I did my best work actually when I was not in the biological sciences, because again, I didn't have that expert blindness. I had a much better idea of what people knew and what people didn't know. All right, and then science policy. So this is a little different than science communication careers, but it has a lot of parallels, and I wanted to talk about it as well. So science policy is an area where you're really doing science communication, but it's got a narrower focus in terms of audience. You're often talking to government officials or people in the broader, elected officials or people in the broader government, or you're talking about, kind of very specific areas where scientific information has hit the importance about society. So in science policy, it has a tendency to be highly collaborative. Usually, not always, but you're usually working with other people, or you're working with a group of volunteer experts that are helping you. Lots of it is heads down. Occasionally, you might need to, again, give a talk or testify in front of an elected body, but you're usually, writing papers or working in meetings that are very private and behind the scenes. There can be individual recognition in this area, but a lot of it is anonymous or collective. Most science policy folks do require an employer. There are very few freelancers out there, although I know a few. Most of them are very late in their career, and they're kind of, then serving as experts later on. So I put does not require a PhD and does require a PhD. What I would say is, I think that there is increasingly need for PhD in this area. You see more and more PhDs in this area, but there certainly are people that come in without a PhD that can be successful here, but I would say that what I see is the trend towards more and more almost requirement for a doctorate when you're looking at science policy. This is not policy writ large, but science policy. People are generalists and specialists. You see both. You're going to be more specialized here than any of the other careers. Although still, as I said, sometimes when you think about it in science, you still might consider yourself a generalist. But generally speaking, I mean, people can be a specialist. And the kinds of titles you're going to see here are government relations, program officer if you're inside a policy organization, policy analyst, research associate, and you can work for government, you can work in organizations, lots of different options here. So you might have said, well, I noticed that almost every career she just said you don't require a PhD. So if you're one of the folks that is out there trying to get a PhD, you might be like, well, is it worth finishing up my degree? Or was it worth getting my degree? And what I would say is this, I do love stock photos, and here's a happy guy in front of a lot of diplomas, that it is always worth getting the PhD. I have never regretted having my PhD, even though those last couple of years were pretty brutal to get through. And this is because I do think that you can rise up higher and faster with a PhD. It's definitely helped my career advancement to have that degree. Also, I think a number of what you've learned as a PhD really helps you when you get out. And so I want to talk a little bit about that is like, well, so I have all of this, I have problem solving, maybe I've done some management, but how do I make that transition? So if you want to make the transition, first you want to get experience. I recommend volunteering. You can do that in your evenings and your weekends. You want to volunteer in the kinds of areas of science that communication that you're interested in. Next is you want to show leadership. It is not enough just to show up and do one after-school experience teaching kids about the brain or something like that and think that that's enough to put on your resume as volunteer work. When I see a resume, I want to see that somebody's organized something, somebody's put things together. You don't have to create something new, but I do love to see that somebody has put together a seminar series, that they've organized their peers to do the after school. That's super important. You want to be consistent. The number of people that I've gotten when I've opened up a science writer job that says, I'm a science writer because I have a blog, and I go and look at their blog and their 2 posts that are all made 4 months ago. If I had a nickel, I'd have a lot of nickels, let me just tell you. What you want to do is be consistent. If you're going to go out and do these, if you're going to volunteer, do it regularly for a while. It's not enough to just do it 1 off or 2 off. You really, really want to build up your experience here so that you can show your future employer that. Network. So I know there's a little bit of speed dating. I'm looking forward to meeting a few of you there, but you have a built-in network in science. Your advisor, when you're at a poster session or giving a talk, you're building your network. You may not realize it, but that's what's happening there. You're meeting other people in the field and they're going to help you. And what you want to do is the same thing over in this area. You want to talk to them. You want to reach out to people and do informational interviews. These are interviews where you literally contact people, probably cold, maybe through a network, and ask to talk to them for a half an hour about their career. Go in, learn about the person's career, and then if it's gone successfully, ask them if they can recommend somebody else that you can talk to. They may not have a job for you, but what I will tell you is that is how you get connected to the jobs. You want to just go in and meet people, go in and talk to people. I will say that many people that are in careers like mine are willing to give time to people coming up. It's how I got my first job. And I am always willing to give 30 minutes of my time to talk to somebody and tell them a little bit about myself. People are usually pretty willing to talk about themselves. And it's a great way to network and a great way for you to learn what you might be interested in. And then finally, you do need a resume and not a CV. Resumes have very different formatting, and they do help to focus on your transferable skills. So if you don't have a resume and you're looking at science communication careers, please do that. Really, I hate seeing CVs. They're not very helpful. When I look at them. So I'm now going to put on my hat about ASCB, just because I think scientific societies are a great way to get some of this volunteer experience. So we are the American Society for Cell Biology. We're an international society. Why should you join? We are a global network. About a quarter of our membership is outside of the United States. And we have a lot of ways you can share your science, including a big meeting. And we have professional development opportunities, a number of which are in science communication. And just to let you know, for my society, and depending on your science, the society that you may or may not be in. We actually give out money for public engagement and science outreach between $1,000 to actually $35,000. We have a bunch of committees that focus on this kind of stuff. Compass, which is our graduate and postdoc committee, our public information committee, which focuses on outreach to the broader public, and our public policy committee, which focuses mostly on the US government, admittedly, but nonetheless focuses on policy. We do SciComm training, and we have public-facing competitions such as a visualization competition. So if you don't join it, if you're not in a society already, I encourage you to join up because it gives you a great chance to get some experience. And after that plug with that, I will stop sharing my window, and I'm happy to see what has come in on the chat. Hopefully we're going to switch back here in just one second. All right. And if there is any questions, I am happy to take questions. Otherwise, I will look forward to seeing you all in the chats. Let me just take a look over here. All right, so I see, so how do academics make, let me see to the top here. So in terms of, I see there's a number of sort of skills and training that people have general communications around. So one thing I would say is there are a lot of science communication training mechanisms out there. I'm more familiar with those that are based in the United States, but I know that there are ones in Europe as well. So there's like the Alan Alda Institute, iBio, and as I mentioned already, a lot of scientific societies. So I would encourage you to kind of get that training at those places. If you just Google science communication training, you're going to find them. And what I also recommend is practicing a lot, because it's all one thing to sort of get training, but actually you have opportunity all the time. You're encountering people all the time that don't know about your science. So it's great, you know, when you think about going home for the holidays, or when you're meeting well, back in the day when we actually met people in real life, when you meet somebody in real life, you can practice and kind of do your spiel. And I do recommend that. I don't know of a lot of places that are online platform or courses. I see that where you can polish your skills. But again, what I recommend is, you know, you think about with writing, you can certainly blog yourself. And with communication, you can try short videos and things like that. You can try those on YouTube. There are a lot of science communicators now on TikTok. You know, places like that are a great place to kind of hone your skills as well. And then let's see. Oh, and then of course, Twitter. Twitter has a lot of science communication. I do see that. What do you think about communicating science and social media? I know I have a few more questions. Like Facebook or Twitter, should it be encouraged or even subsidized? In terms of communicating science and social media, I think it's wonderful. I think it's a really great place to communicate. I am a huge fan of Twitter. I'm currently, embarrassing, I should say, a huge fan of TikTok, even though my government is not so keen on it. Lots of science communicators that are doing awesome on that platform. So I do think that those are great ways to get out and communicate. What you need to realize is a lot of those things, particularly Facebook and Twitter, have a lot of echo chambers. So, you know, it can be challenging because you're not necessarily in a fact-based area. And scientists always argue on facts. And of course, the dialogue is not always about facts. But that's a great learning opportunity, is one of the things I would say. All right. Would you recommend to get a degree in law or international relations after a PhD for getting a science policy job? I would say that probably isn't necessary. You know, people do that. If you're going into law, like patent law, you clearly need a law degree. But in terms of policy, most people go in and they are not getting a second degree in international relations. It is a hard field to get into, though, to get that initial burst in. What I would recommend is, you know, starting at your institutions. Often, many institutions, universities and things have government relations or things like that. It's like start with that office. All right, I see my little thing just jumped. So,
if you want, I can read out the questions for you.
Oh, it's okay. Let's see. So I see again a question from Stevie. I'm sorry if I'm massacring your name. Talking about getting experience on editing letters, CVs, science reports, proposals, etc. To kind of get in for a science communication career. So again, as I mentioned, what I would do is volunteer. I think around, you know, editing letters and reports and proposals, that isn't going to get you ton. If it's all science-based and you're really editing proposals, unless you're going to proposal writing, it's not going to get you quite the level of experience you want. If you're talking about communicating to the broader public, that's quite different writing. Actually, I could do a whole talk on this. Science writing actually teaches you to write the exact opposite way than you want to write when you're writing for the broader public. Scientists start with like all of the background, and then they go through everything they did, and then they eventually get to the conclusion at the bottom. When you're writing for the broader public, you want to start with the conclusion, and then you build your argument afterwards. So it's actually the exact opposite. So I would say that you want to get that experience with other kinds of writing if you want to go into science communication careers. And again, consistency, and you can do it yourself. Even if you're blogging, if you're a good writer, it gives you at least that example that you can then tell your new employer, hey, look over here at my blog, and people can see that you've been consistent. In terms of the PhD graduate for science jobs in Europe, I am more familiar with the American setup. What I would say is, again, a lot of people go into those careers. There are certain areas of science that are a little easier to make the transition. So science that has intersection with society. So right now, for example, infectious disease, topics, quite good. And I see that we're probably over time.
It's fine. We can go on for a few minutes if you have the time.
Okay, I do. Things like infectious disease, things related to global climate change, those kinds of science where there's already an intersection with the societal impacts do make it easier. If you're in an area of science that's quite abstract, it is a little bit harder to make that policy switch. So I would say that thinking about the area of science and thinking about how it intersects with societal will help you in science policy career transitions. And how do we academics make a good science communicators? What I would say is for academics, it's practice and ask for feedback. So a lot of people, what I see, the best science communicators, usually when I run a science communication training, the people that show up, they're already pretty good. And that's why they're seeking out more experience. So what I would say is just practice, do it, ask for feedback, and again, take advantage of some of the kinds of communication training that's out there, both at your institution and more broadly. All right, and let's see, what at the moment is the gold standard for applications? Is it more important to give a wholesome overview of what one did in total, or should one focus on job-specific experiences to be underlined? So what I say when I'm looking at resumes and cover letters is I want to see the connection. Hiring managers, I think I've read, spend on average less than 5 seconds looking at a resume initially. So you need to put it right up front how your experience matches. So I think it's always good not to go overboard on this, but if the job has certain, qualifications that you've either highlighted those or make sure they're up top in your resume, like I fit your job by boom, 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 makes it easier for me to see that. So I really do appreciate those kind of tailored things. You don't need to tailor the whole resume, but I do recommend tailoring cover letters each time. There's a debate. I know hiring managers that don't read cover letters. Personally, I read them before I even look at the resume. It's like, I don't want to waste my time with the resume if I'm not looking at that, but people are both ways. But I'd say a little bit of specific in that cover letter. And what do you think your best work was done in fields that were not biology? So in terms of some of the things I was most proud of that were not biology, one was a website that I did on safe drinking water, and it was designed to be used in Africa and have people that had some expertise bring it to decision makers. And it had a pretty complicated decision tree in it. I mean, it was complicated in the back end, but the front end, people could put in all the different types of water issues they might have, like arsenic or different kinds of bacteria. And then they could see, here are all the technologies that will help you clean them up. And it had explanations and videos. I was super proud of that. Really, really proud of that one. And then I really liked, we did an area all around nutrition, which is kind of is biology, but we worked with a community group to make it possible. And it really made it so much better. That community group brought so many insights for us. So I really, really felt like that was great. And I think I'm at the end of the questions now. Anything else?
Thank you so much for this lovely talk, and you went through the Q&A. I think it was the fastest Q&A ever. It was amazing. You managed to answer everything, and we're not that over time. We'll have Erica back with us for the speed dating where you can ask questions to her personally. So please join for that. And also, we would like to kind of advertise our Horizons hashtag. It would be great if you could post pictures from where you're sitting, where you're attending the conference from, and post them with the hashtag Horizons 2020. And we'll have Erica soon at 15:40.
Look forward to
And
seeing you then.
please don't miss out the talk having taking place in 5 minutes with Joanne Cammons from AdGene. So if you're looking forward to it, there's a sticky note in the chat. Thank you so much, Erica.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.